Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics. We are three film geeks discussing movies, both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week, our new release slate is not huge, with only one nationwide release out of the furnace, but we do have a couple of holdover films, and we'll also go over the homework assignment we gave each other last week when we revealed our favorite movie musicals. We also have, of course, our triple feature. Our new classic is The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, in anticipation of the sequel, which we'll talk about next week. Our old classic is Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, starring Robert Downey Jr., and our Oscar nominee A to Z this week is After the Thin Man. And inspired by the latter two films in the triple feature, our top five this week is murder mystery films. Before we get started, though, there's been a little controversy in Hollywood over the last couple weeks regarding the upcoming awards season. Scarlett Johansson, who is getting raves and awards already for her voice-only performance as Samantha, a Siri-like computer program, was deemed ineligible by the Golden Globes for a supporting actress nomination. Now, the Oscars and Screen Actors Guild have said they will allow her to be nominated if she gets the votes to merit it, but it does raise the question about non-traditional performances and how they should be viewed by awards boards. Let's start just talking about Scarlett Johansson specifically. Obviously, none of us have seen the movie yet. The movie is called Her, and it comes out nationwide in January. But we've seen the trailers for this, and obviously there's some emotion behind the performance. Joe, what do you think of the whole thing?
I just think that these particular academies have to just start widening their views on these things, because there are many different kinds of acting, and I don't think some people get the recognition that they deserve. For instance, Mark Hamill, great voice actor, and a lot of people understand this, but I don't know if he's really been recognized for too many awards, many official ceremonies or anything. So the fact that she's not even being given a chance, I think, is just ridiculous. I mean, we've seen people like Andy Serkis do many great roles that are somewhat non-traditional, but I think he's at least worthy of a mention, and some people wouldn't even give him a chance. I personally don't understand that at all.
Yeah, a lot of people were crying foul when Lord of the Rings was nominated for pretty much every award that existed the one year, and Andy Serkis wasn't even really mentioned in the conversation, except by people saying, hey, where's Andy Serkis?
I do remember that. That was a big part of the conversation.
Yeah.
People were quite outraged because they didn't even give him any recognition at all, not even a nod.
No, and Gollum is obviously a huge part of the Lord of the Rings franchise.
He's part of the story, and he gave a really good performance. And I mean, it's not just vocal, it's also visual.
Right.
So, people have to take that into account. Yes, there's a CGI creation over the man, but the man's still there.
And that kind of performance is not easy.
No, it's physically demanding, it's emotionally demanding, I'd imagine, if you really get into the role. And he's the kind of individual who really puts a lot of effort into it, and it usually pays off well. I think he deserves recognition.
Yeah.
So, definitely.
Justin, what do you think? Scarlett Johansson obviously has, this voice-only performance. She's got no physicality to it, but, I mean, it's still possibly a great performance.
I'd have to echo Joe completely on this one. It's completely and utterly ridiculous. When you look at all the Oscar nominees and winners over the years that have had either roles with very minimal screen time, I think the one that comes most notably to mind is Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, who I believe was only on screen for about 20 minutes. I think Heath Ledger as the Joker had almost as much screen time. And
I think Judi Dench in Shakespeare in Love is probably the most classic example.
That too.
I forget the time on it, but it was something like 8 minutes or 13 minutes. It was not long.
Exactly, and the fact that she's playing this character that is voice only, I mean, it doesn't really make sense to me. It's about emotion. It's about how you develop your character. It shouldn't have to do with whether or not your character is actually on screen. It's a matter of how memorable you give a performance. Mm-hmm. And I really hope that they end up overturning that rule. I think it's completely outrageous that one award ceremony is willing to honor that performance and another one is going to completely reject it. It's just completely unfair.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Oscars made their ruling on that after the Golden Globes had decided to not allow it. I think the Academy probably didn't even give it a second thought. Sure, it's a performance, we'll let it be nominated. And then when the Golden Globes came up and said, we're not going to recognize this, I think that's when the Academy said, okay, just so we're all clear, we will recognize this. So if you want to vote for this person, you can. To me, it actually reminds me a little bit about the movie The Sessions, in which John Hawkes has very, very limited physical abilities in the film. And, I wouldn't say it's an exclusively a voice performance, but obviously he's, confined pretty much the whole movie. and he did not get nominated. Helen Hunt got nominated for her performance in the movie, but I don't think there was a conversation. I mean, obviously it wasn't as high profile a movie, but I don't think there was a conversation even about, well, can he be nominated, can he not be nominated, because it was just a great performance. I know you were kind of bummed out he wasn't nominated.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously he stood no chance of winning over Daniel Day-Lewis's Lincoln,
Sure.
but it still would have been great to at least have him recognized for that.
Yeah, to have him in the field. Well, we will see what happens. I guess the nominations for the Oscars will be announced in about a month, so we'll see how that all plays out. All right, well, let's move to our new releases, and first up we're going to do the big nationwide release of the week, and that is Out of the Furnace, and Joe's going to tell us about that.
Out of the Furnace. A thriller directed by Scott Cooper and produced by Ridley Scott and Leonardo DiCaprio, the film follows Russell Baze, played by Christian Bale, and his brother Rodney, played by Casey Affleck. The two men are residents of an economically depressed town and have themselves fallen on hard times. Russell tries to balance hard work at a local steel mill with taking care of his aging father, as well as watching out for his younger brother, and having a relationship with a woman named Lena, played by Zoe Saldana. Things are complicated further when Rodney falls into a web of evil in the form of underground fighting matches. This leads him into contact with a vicious hick, played wonderfully by Woody Harrelson. When a deal goes bad and Rodney disappears into the mountains, Russell decides to take matters into his own hands and go as vigilante. I really enjoyed this film. I think the ensemble cast does very well. Though the film is slow, it doesn't feel boring, and the characters are rather likable for the most part. Particularly Russell. This is most likely a combination of good acting and good direction. However, the main plot of the underground fighting seems less interesting to me than Bale's story of tragedy, and some characters are admittedly a bit underdeveloped. Still, I believe this film had a great atmosphere and told a good story. I would give it a B+.
Wow, pretty high grade. Justin, what'd you think of Out of the Furnace?
So, with director Scott Cooper, who most might know from his earlier film Crazy Heart, the man knows how to write characters. But in his sophomore effort with Out of the Furnace, this aspect serves as the film's greatest strength and worst weakness. Christian Bale does an incredibly good job playing the noble, albeit troubled average Joe Russell, but his brother Rodney, played by Casey Affleck, tends to overplay his character. There's no question that the horrors of war can shake anyone, but the way Affleck portrays it comes off as somewhat cheesy at times. That said, the story, while dark and ugly, is incredibly compelling for roughly the first hour or so, with it unfortunately losing steam near the end as Forrest Whitaker's character gets introduced, leading the film to a somewhat strange conclusion. Out of the Furnace is a dark and brutal film that's likely to divide audiences, but it's still a great film with some relatively good performances, and I give it also a B+.
Well, I would say it divided this audience. You guys both loved it a bit more than I did. I thought it was slow to get started, and once it did, it wasn't much more than your average revenge pick. But it is propelled by its star-studded cast, and unfortunately little else. There are many things mentioned in the film that either go untended to, are completely unnecessary to the story, or don't get fully developed enough to make a lot of sense, and it all becomes sort of a mess because of it. Woody Harrelson and Forrest Whitaker are the latest in a recent string of characters that speak so low and mumbled that you really need subtitles to understand them, like we sort of talked about last week with Jeff Bridges and R.I.P.D. But in typical fashion, their performances are still good, as are Christian Bale, Casey Affleck, and Willem Dafoe. Zoe Saldana and Sam Shepard are complete throwaways, however. Their characters were pretty much useless, I thought. I did enjoy the Steel Town atmosphere, and opening and closing the film with one of the greatest songs ever written, Pearl Jam's Release, was genius, and the good performances are enough to propel Furnace up to an average grade, but for me it doesn't deserve much higher than that. I give it a C+.
Whoa.
Okay.
I'll give you Forrest Whitaker, but Woody Harrelson didn't bother me that much. I thought he played his character the way it was supposed to be done, ominous and brutal, but I wouldn't necessarily call him mumbled.
No, I thought he was pretty distinct for the most part. I think he did a better job than Jeff Bridges and R.I.P.D.
I had a hard time understanding Woody Harrelson.
Oh, okay.
I mean, he didn't say much to begin with, but I mean, I've seen him in a number of films, and I love Woody Harrelson because he is a chameleon like that. He can play many different roles. I mean, obviously, we just heard his voice a few weeks ago in Freebirds, which is quite different from this.
No, he's got a lot of diversity. I thought he did a good job. He at least tried to capture that ominous feel. He really did, I thought.
Oh, yeah. And like I say, I mean, I'm not speaking specifically about the character itself, or his performance, but the mumbling of the words for me was a no-go.
I will admit, Forrest Whitaker definitely. I think I mentioned this to you earlier, Dan, about one particular scene when they're having dinner together, and Forrest Whitaker goes into the kitchen, meets Christian Bale, and I feel like they're supposed to have this brief conversation that has a lot of weight and meaning. Mm-hmm. It seems to tie into the title, and I thought it was really important, but I could only understand two words: fire, furnace. Let's put this behind us. I'm like, did somebody cut a couple lines out? Because he looks away from the camera as if he wasn't sure if there were lines, and maybe we're not supposed to hear them. I don't know, but
that's sort of how the whole film felt to me. It felt like a whole slew of half-hatched ideas and things that didn't go anywhere.
Well, there were different plot points that I guess you could argue weren't fully developed per se. However, I think the characters portraying them in certain ways and reacting to each other and the atmosphere surrounding them, I think is kind of meant to reflect that somewhat. You're supposed to kind of interpret that yourself. I mean, they don't explain everything for you. Like, for instance, there is something that happens to Christian Bale's character, I think within the first act or so of the film, that directly affects his character for the rest of it. But we don't really get to see the full outcome of that. We just see some of the after effects, not necessarily internally too much about how he feels about it, because he doesn't speak openly about it.
Right.
But we see him going to church, we see him struggling to find a job, we see him working on the house. You know, we're meant to kind of project onto him a little bit what we're feeling from outside perspective.
And I feel that his character was the strongest in the whole film.
Oh, definitely.
So what does that tell you? I mean, it's not a matter of I didn't want to fill in the blanks. I thought his character was great. And
I will admit that's one of the reasons I didn't give it a higher grade, is because for me, I liked that down-to-earth character. He seemed like a really nice guy, trying to do the right thing. And I really got behind him, and I liked his story. I liked where it was going. To be honest, the main action part I thought was okay, but it felt more like it was a hook rather than the main portion of the film.
Right.
And I agree with what you said, Justin. I think that Casey Affleck's a pretty good actor, but yeah, I think the whole anti-war message they were going for got a little cheesy at points. Like, some of the dialogue was like, would he really say that, or is this what somebody who thinks a soldier who's been through this would say? Mm-hmm. You know, it didn't seem quite genuine. But I still think the general performance was okay. You got the feeling.
Well, before we wrap this up, let me ask you this, Justin, because Joe and I briefly touched on this earlier. Okay. Obviously we don't do spoilers on this show, so without really divulging too much, did you understand what happened at the end of the film? Because it's a complete question mark to me. And it was to Joe and the other person we were talking to today about it.
No, I'm with you, hence me saying strange conclusion in my review. I have a couple ideas. I don't really have a lot of answers.
Okay. And see, I think there's a difference between strange conclusion and not a conclusion, or a complete mystery of what we're supposed to be seeing. And I have trouble giving a movie a high grade if I don't understand the end of it.
Well, here's my problem with the ending. I felt like the way they cut it off worked, and then they decided they want one extra little piece of mystery that doesn't.
I agree.
That doesn't really seem to make much sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I don't know about you two, but I was just sort of confused. I wouldn't say it necessarily hurt it. It was just more or less I didn't understand it.
It was almost like a post-credit sequence before the credits.
Exactly.
Because you're right. It faded to black. Everything could have ended there, and I probably actually would have given it a B- if that were the case. But then we have this, 30-second scene that just makes no sense. All right, well, let's move on here. We have a few other films to get to, and let's talk about The Book Thief. Justin?
Thank you, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
After her mother can no longer take care of her, illiterate Liesel, played by Sophie Nélis, moves in with her foster parents, played by Jeffrey Rush and Emily Watson. Though as she develops a passion for reading, the German soldiers begin to burn books, causing her to take those left behind for her own collection. The book thief suffers from telling an interesting, albeit arguably sappy, tale the safest way humanly possible. The cast does a good job with what they have, but the disturbing nature of World War II Germany gets wildly toned down, which is really a pity from other films that have handled the content so well. The one that strikes me the most is The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, that came out a couple years ago. That's not to say that there aren't any sad and tough-to-watch moments in the film, but when Crystal Knot, aka the Knight of Broken Glass, gets reduced to a 30-second sequence, it loses the emotional impact the film really needs. Instead, the film relies heavily on the narration of a calm Grim Reaper, narrated by Roger Allam, to address the darker elements, and while occasionally offering a poignant outlook, it often just comes off as odd. As a result, The Book Thief comes off as a means to appeal to a younger audience in regards to a brutal time period. It's not a bad film. It just could have been so much more, and for that, I give it a B.
Well, what's super interesting is that that's pretty much my review, except I give it a much lower grade. I did not care for this movie. I thought it had a ton of problems from the start. The performances were solid, especially from Jeffrey Rush and Sophie Nélisse, but the Grinch-like narration took me out of the movie every time it came up, and it was just one of the worst choices to show how to tell the story. And then the story itself is so watered down and safe and almost cutesy at times that it's just a little ridiculous. I don't mind adding a little humor into a truly awful story. I'm one who believes that humor can get you by even in the worst of times. But the way it's done here just would not be how I would have gone. And I completely agree with you that The Boy in the Striped Pajamas would be a go-to substitute for this film. I gave The Book Thief a C-.
Whoa.
What did you like so much about it? Because it didn't... I mean, it seemed like we have the exact same problems with it and likes with it.
Well, like I said, I did like the performances. There were a couple stylistic things I really liked come to conclusion. I thought the connections that they made with the characters, even though, as I said, they were a little bit sappy, I did get a little bit emotional when, obviously, likable characters end up dying. Minor spoiler.
No, it's World War II.
It is.
Yeah.
And it is the Holocaust. Yes, absolutely. And even though I'm not entirely sure if it actually worked, the death narration, I thought, was an interesting way of handling it. I'm not entirely sure if it worked as much as they would have wanted it to, but I don't necessarily think they should have shied away from it either.
I think that the main problem with this movie, and the narration sort of ties into it, is that I feel like if this were made in, let's say, the 1980s, it would be rated PG. It was so cleaned up and so safe, and having death narrate it, it just seemed like it was for 10-year-olds, not the people that it should be for. This is an introduction into, the Holocaust and stuff for young children, young-ish children, okay. But did you think it was that solid of a telling?
I thought the tale was okay. I wouldn't say it was great by any means. Yes, it was watered down, but I mean, if you're looking for a film that you can actually show a younger audience, you could do a whole lot worse than this. Albeit The Boy in the Striped Pajamas is a infinitely better substitute, but this isn't necessarily the worst choice in the world either.
Well, you also hit on the emotional tone of the movie and the aspect of, when certain characters pass on. I like a good cry at a movie. I mean, in the past month alone, I've cried at Frozen, The Best Man Holiday, Philomena, which we're going to talk about next week on the show. I didn't feel anything when anything happened in this movie. And to me, that says something.
If it weren't for one of the characters dying being a little bit predictable, I might have gotten a little bit emotional. But since it was so able to be seen a mile away, I do somewhat second with you on that. And I would like to note on a side note, two of those movies you mentioned I almost cried in as well.
Frozen and Philomena?
You are correct, sir.
Okay. I figured Best Man Holiday didn't probably grab you the way it did me.
No, you are correct.
All right. I was just wondering, because, we seem to have the same problems with it, but I definitely don't give it a positive. All right, well, let's move on to Homefront. And in Homefront's opening scene, we see DEA agent Phil Broker, played by Jason Statham, taking down a biker gang leader, after which he retires with his elementary school daughter to a sleepy Louisiana town. Unfortunately, trouble finds him there when his daughter gets in a fight at school, and the uncle of the boy she hits is a drug kingpin in the area, played by James Franco, and soon all the baddies in the town are on a mission to make Phil's life hell, even if it kills him. Homefront's script was adapted from Chuck Logan's book, adapted by Sylvester Stallone, and some of the dialogue in this film, especially when the action really starts to come to a head, is so ridiculous that it's almost laughable. James Franco really is the least consistent actor out there, and though he rarely turns in a bad performance, some of his film choices are truly bizarre. Even on paper, Homefront seems like a C-grade action movie at best, or maybe direct-to-DVD, so what drew Franco to it, I am not sure. It's littered with plot holes and ridiculous coincidences, and enough shaky cam action that I barely knew who was shooting who. However, that being said, I wasn't bored with it. And it is better than a couple of the lackluster action flicks of the year, notably A Good Day to Die Hard. So I do give Homefront not an F, but a D. Joe, you didn't realize it was written by Sylvester Stallone, did you?
When you said that,
your face,
it all became
clear why it's so the way it is.
Now I'm like, because I made a comment to you, and I was like, "Wow, that's that just makes some sense."
But here's the thing, though. Stallone can actually write, so why he
did Rocky?
He wrote Rocky, yes, 30 years ago. I don't know if he still has the touch. And listen, he had a work to go from. It's adapted from a book, so it shouldn't have been
that difficult,
that laborious to do it. I mean, I didn't read the book. Maybe the book has really corny dialogue too.
I hope not. But
yeah.
I mean,
but Joe, let's hear from you since we're talking.
Winona Ryder was in this.
Yes, and Winona Ryder played James Franco's girlfriend in it.
I thought that was her.
Yeah.
Okay.
Her character didn't really seem enough to even mention.
Well, I still feel like it's worth mentioning. The action is sloppy due to less than stellar choreography. There are far too many close-ups and shaky cam. It's nice to see that Jason Statham tries to branch out, but his acting really isn't that great here, and to be honest, it rarely is anywhere. And sadly, James Franco is at about the same level here, and so is Winona Ryder. Really, this film didn't do too much for me. However, I will admit that, like Dan, I was not bored in it. I thought the story was at least trying to be somewhat compelling, though the villain's motivations are pretty goofy, and the dialogue is god-awful. However, it does kind of stretch into the territory of being entertainingly bad, perhaps, though I do agree that a DVD rental might be sufficient if you're really bored and want to see some cheap thrills. But really, I wouldn't even bother seeing this in theaters. Much like Dan, I give Homefront a D.
Nice. Justin, how did Homefront grab you?
I don't think we're going to see much differentiation in this one, Dan.
Okay, fair enough.
All right, so when it comes to Jason Statham movies, the audience knows what to expect. Statham beats people up, talks in his traditional, albeit gritty for Hollywood British accent, and continues to fight whatever stock villain the film has thrown his way. It's far from his earlier days with Guy Ritchie, like in Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch, where he works so much better as a supporting character, but sadly those days are gone. However, in Homefront, which was written by, as Dan put it, action star Sylvester Stallone, one might think that this could be at least a little bit better than what Statham has done in the past, but instead it continues to be more of the same. Statham brings nothing to the table that he hasn't done several times over, and the narrative even more so. The only thing that's even remotely interesting about this film comes from James Franco as drug dealer Gator Bodine, who in the beginning of the film seems like he might be a bit more than just another stock villain by dealing with kids and family members who are addicts. Unfortunately, this only lasts until the end of Act 1, and after that he's reduced to yet another stock villain. Although for that brief amount of time, I have to admit I was intrigued, and for that, I too will give Homefront a D.
It's certainly a little more entertaining than some of the action movies we've had this year.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say that. It's funny, last week I had 2 A's back-to-back in the new releases, and this week not hitting them out of the park.
It's really strange, too, because you think that if Stallone could write anything, it would be action.
And was it ever clear to anyone in the film why Jason Statham has a British accent in Louisiana?
I didn't understand that either.
It's never addressed at all. I mean,
I also found a bunch of plot holes in the film, but
oh yeah, it's littered with.
Oh, that's right. Thank you for reminding me. Inadvertently, as you did, there was one positive that probably brought it up to a D even more than I was trying to figure out what exactly about it was entertaining to me that made me smile. That said, okay, this isn't a complete failure. Clancy Brown gave a great performance as the sheriff for about 5 minutes, and I was like, yes.
And then we almost never see him again.
Who is Clancy Brown?
Clancy Brown, the Kurgan Highlander, played Lex Luthor in the Superman animated series.
Okay.
Awesome. He was in Cowboys and Aliens.
I kind of like the Cowboys and Aliens.
He's kind of a good character.
Pleasure.
Yeah. He's a good character actor, and he does a good job. And
yeah, he's not bad in it.
Yeah, he was good.
And James Franco's, is fine. I mean, none of his performances are really that bad. Some of his movies are awful.
I wouldn't say that his performance was terrible, but I kind of felt like he was sort of phoning it in, like just kind of,
Yeah.
He was just doing it.
He knew what he was in.
He was casually like, I'm being a bad guy.
Well, when you got to figure, when you make like 4 or 5 movies a year,
maybe
you're not going to get A+ performances every time. I mean, already off the top of my head, Oz the Great and Powerful, This Is the End, Spring Breakers, and Homefront, and I'm sure there's at least 2 more that went right to DVD that I can't think of.
That is true.
But, alright, well, moving on now, one that I saw called Blue Is The Warmest Color. This year's winner of the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival is this French coming-of-age film dealing with sexuality. It's the first film ever that Cannes awarded their top prize to a film's director and lead actress. Both names are very French, so I won't attempt to pronounce them, but the film follows high school student Adele, who, after an unsatisfying fling with a boy, meets blue-haired art student Emma at a gay dance club that she went to with some friends and falls instantly in love with her. They embark on an intense relationship over several years and move in together, and the movie is about the ups and downs of any young relationship. This is the first NC-17 rated film we've reviewed on the show. Does this mean it's a more honest film? It does not. It just means there are a few very explicit sex scenes, and as we've discussed on the show before, the MPAA is harsher on sex and language than on violence, and Blue uses the NC-17 to full potential. But I don't really think it's all that necessary. I am about the furthest thing from a prude, but the explicitness of the sex in the film is nothing short of gratuitous. To excise it from the film or make the scene shorter and less graphic, some might say would be to affect the artistic vision of the film, but honestly it wouldn't. It borders on full-on pornography at points, and I would feel the same about editing it if the scenes involved gratuitous violence instead of sex. I also felt like it was missing a sense of humor. This is supposed to feel like true life, and though we do get the emotional resonance of it, where's the laughter that accompanies those fuzzy feelings of first love? This film had very little of it. Now, that all being said, the 2 leads playing Adele and Emma are nothing short of fantastic. I would not be surprised if one of them was nominated at the Oscars. Also, its nearly 3-hour runtime did not feel like it at all. The film is very, very well paced. So there's some good and some bad, but the good wins out, and I give Blue Is the Warmest Color a B. Justin, I know you were bummed that you didn't get to see this one.
I really, really wish I had been able to. I'm hoping I can get a shot to review it in February.
Yeah, when the DVD comes out, we may have to revisit it so you guys can get a taste of it. I mean, understand this. It's a 3-hour movie. There were maybe 3 really gratuitous sex scenes that lasted 5 minutes each. So that's why it didn't drag the movie down too much. Just pumped for the lesbian sex scenes, though.
I'm sure it could be entertaining at least.
Yeah.
One professor of mine once said that sex scenes can be good as long as they help push the story forward. I guess in this case they didn't necessarily.
They did not, and it's interesting because later on tonight we're going to do our new classic for the week that we'll talk about on next week's podcast, and that is another NC-17 movie called Shame. And there is a lot of sex in Shame, none of which, if I remember correctly, I found gratuitous.
Or out of place.
Or out of place. I mean, granted, the theme of that movie is he's a sex addict, so it's a little more in line with his character, but I didn't think that we needed to have that much sexual involvement.
Would you say that
in Blue Is the Warmest Color,
sexual escapades in the film, the sex scenes should have been taken out completely, or the length of them was kind of superfluous?
I think that they could have been a little more sanitized. I mean, you really see things in this movie that you see in an average porno film, to be honest.
To be fair, I think that is more common in European films. I guess there's just a little less strict of a standard. Maybe that's why
I would agree with that.
Maybe it seems more intense from an American perspective.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
It is, I think, noteworthy that both of the lead actresses said that the director, who is a man, was horrible to work for and that they would never work with him again.
Well,
I don't know if that specifically has to do with the sex scenes themselves, but I think it is a little bit telling that maybe they felt he went a little too far also. I don't know.
Maybe he did. Some directors do that.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question, though, Dan.
Yeah.
Do you think they should have tried to tone it down for an R rating?
No, not necessarily. I think they could have still gotten NC-17. I mean, the scenes we're going to see tonight in Shame are not anything remotely as explicit as the scenes in Blue. I think they could have cleaned up the scenes in Blue. If they still wanted to go for an NC-17, that's fine. I just thought, they were too long, too explicit, too completely unnecessary to the story. So, yeah. All right, well, let's move on to the home media moment, and that is Frances Ha. Now, I was hesitant to see this movie because I'm kind of sick of the industry trying to ram Greta Gerwig down our throats as the new indie darling, or, as in the case of the Arthur remake with Russell Brand, the sexy love interest. But after a few average to poor movies, Gerwig may have found her niche, and not just as an actress. She co-wrote the screenplay for Frances Ha with director Noah Baumbach, her current boyfriend, and it hits a lot of right notes, as does her performance as the title character. Frances is a dancer in her late 20s, living with her best friend Sophie, when Sophie moves out to live with someone else, leaving Frances to examine her life in just about every aspect. It's a funny and honest film, and shot in black and white, it's something a little different too. Now, it might be a little too indie for some, but especially for fans of, say, Woody Allen or Jim Jarmusch, it's something to check out. And I give Frances Ha a surprising B+. Justin, what'd you think?
Oh, wow. Was not actually expecting that, Dan. I thought
you knew how much I was not looking forward to watching it.
I was going to say I had to fight you every step on the way on this one.
That's right.
All right. So with Frances Ha, this is a film that really thrives on its realistic yet very simple narrative. Frances is the very definition of a flawed, or undateable, as a running gag in the film would say. And she has some of the worst days imaginable, but every awful thing that happens to her is more than plausible. The result makes the comedy aspects quirky enough without becoming overly goofy, and the dramatic elements understandable, albeit paints Frances in a less flattering light. The film does suffer from over-reliance on Frances's intoxicated banter, which, as to be expected, leads her to getting in even more trouble. Frances Ha will definitely not be for everyone, but for anyone willing to give it a go, there might be some fun to be had, and I give it a B.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of the better indies of the year. It was a bit of a surprise.
I agree. I thought it was going to be decent. I just didn't expect it to be that good.
Yeah, I kept hearing how good it was, and all I could think of is, you told us that Greta Gerwig was great in this movie and that movie, and they stunk. So I was not, and I didn't realize she wrote it until the credits rolled, actually. Or co-wrote it, I should say. I do find that when it's more sort of kept amongst just a few people, I mean, she co-wrote it with the director, and she stars in it, I think that makes it a little bit more honest, a little bit, less studio pressure to do this or that. You kind of can keep it more contained. And I think we saw that with this movie.
I really particularly liked her roommates when she was sharing an apartment.
Yeah.
I thought they were very real, very honest characters that were just slight of being too witty and still keeping relatively dramatic and still keeping with the overall theme of the movie, trying to reach your goals despite the hardships, despite constantly being kicked to the curb on it.
When I sort of get the feeling that, and I don't know Greta Gerwig from Adam, but I sort of get the feeling that because the dialogue is so realistic and everything she goes through is so real, that probably she replaced the struggling actress bit in the movie with struggling dancer, and this is kind of a semi-autobiographical film.
Yeah, I would definitely be able to see that.
All right, well, let's move on now. We're going to do our top 5 murder mysteries coming up here, inspired by 2 of our triple feature films, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang and After the Thin Man. But first, last week we did our top 10 movie musicals, and for the first time ever, we decided to assign ourselves some homework. Your number 1, Joe, was something I had never seen before, The Prince of Egypt. And my number 2, Dreamgirls, is something I had been trying to get you to watch for months, so we sort of made a little agreement that we would talk about it on the show, and Justin jumped in with a movie on my list, Guys and Dolls, that he had never seen. So let's start with you, Joe. What did you think of Dreamgirls?
I thought Dreamgirls was fun. I thought the art direction was really good, as well as the acting. The performances were all great, and I liked the music. I thought it was pretty good for the most part. Not entirely my thing, but I enjoyed it overall. Really, it was good to see Eddie Murphy back again in an honestly good role, and I kind of wanted to see more of him.
Yeah, wasn't he great?
I was kind of sad that he wasn't in the movie longer, and I also thought that Jamie Foxx did a really good job playing a really scummy villain who just kind of destroys everything and everyone around him, and I thought he did a great job with that. It was also really good to see Danny Glover again.
One of your favorites.
Haven't seen him in a long time, and it was really good to see him actually in a meaty role where he was in the movie for a fair amount of time. So that was
I forgot that he was in that.
Yeah, I did too. Actually, too. Joe and I were discussing it earlier.
It was nice. He really did a good job with his little role. I thought it told a good story. I liked all the individual story arcs that for each of the female leads. I didn't really know any of them, Did they have any previous roles?
Well, you knew Beyonce, of course.
Beyonce, yes.
Jennifer Hudson plays Effie, the ousted dream girl.
I really liked her character the most.
she won an Oscar for the performance. It was her first acting gig, but she had been on American Idol previously.
Okay.
So
what about the third girl? Do you know her?
The third girl is Annika Noni Rose, who actually, if you saw the movie The Princess and the Frog, she plays the princess.
Oh.
So she has a few acting credits to her name.
I like her too then.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. I guess the only real negatives I felt were that I liked the historical backdrop, but I felt that they were just kind of glossed over and they didn't seem like they fully impacted the characters.
Okay.
Which I just didn't think that was quite executed that well. And I felt that some plot points were kind of a bit rushed. But overall, I did enjoy the film. I thought it was pretty good. I'd probably give it like a B.
Cool. Yeah, we'll obviously talk at length about Dreamgirls in due time when it comes up for Oscar A to Z, or if I can't hold out that long, maybe we'll do it for an old classic at some point. Justin, what'd you think of Guys and Dolls?
Well, I have to really be thankful for this podcast because there are so many classics I've been meaning to watch or rewatch, and this has really been my perfect excuse. I started Guys and Dolls a long time ago when I want to say I was 11, and I never came back to it. I don't even have a very good reason why I didn't. After seeing it, I can't say I was excited about it, as Dan mentioned, but that's not to say I didn't enjoy it. I love the story despite its predictability, and I thoroughly enjoyed Marlon Brando and Frank Sinatra in the leads. My only real issue with it came from the music itself. It's not so much that the songs are out of place, but rather they take one out of the story and run on entirely too long. That said, I did enjoy myself watching it, but I just wish it was about 20 minutes shorter with a few of the lesser songs ousted, and I give Guys and Dolls a B. And I want everyone to know right now, Dan looks like he wants to kill me.
Listen, the reason I decided to watch Guys and Dolls last week before we did our top 10 is because, though I had never seen the movie, we talked about this last week, I've seen the stage show several times, the music in Guys and Dolls is my absolute all-time favorite. Well, I shouldn't say that because Sound of Music, but...
Let me just make a note. Music is incredibly subjective.
It is, and that's absolutely true. You're right. It is. Maybe I have some partiality to some of the songs, Justin, because when I was in high school, we sang a few of them in choir, and that's how I was originally introduced to the show.
Okay.
So maybe I have some sentimentality issues there. And I do agree that they don't always necessarily move the plot along, but they are good songs.
It's not necessarily that they're bad, they just kind of like ruin the tone. The story is really compelling, and then once the song numbers come in, it's like, I'm not as interested, and I keep waiting for the story to come back.
Well, it is a good story as well, so
your
I
least
can't fault you for that.
Your least favorite part of it was the musical aspect.
Somewhat. Like I said, they're not bad songs. They just don't necessarily catch you like Dreamgirls, like Singing in the Rain. I never felt engaged while hearing them.
Well, you definitely won me back by talking about how great Dreamgirls is.
It's always
like,
yeah.
Like, for example, I mean, I'm sorry, but I truly did not like what's playing at the Roxy.
Oh, that's okay. Well, that's never mind.
Move on.
So good. We're moving on. All right, I'm going to talk about Prince of Egypt very briefly, and then we'll get into this week's top 5. Prince of Egypt is a movie I probably would have never seen if you didn't place it at your number 1.
Okay, good.
I respect your opinions about movies, and a lot of the number ones actually that you've said I have not seen. So hopefully eventually we'll get to them for the show. But I thought Prince of Egypt was definitely bold for one of the very early DreamWorks films. And you had made a comment earlier to me that, DreamWorks plays it a little more safe now. And I think that that's probably true. I don't think that they would have done a Bible-type story now after the huge success that they've had with movies like Shrek and Kung Fu Panda. This was in the very, very early days of DreamWorks, and I'm sure the fellas that ran the studio at the time, Steven Spielberg included, called in a lot of favors because the voice talent in this movie is fantastic. I had picked out Jeff Goldblum, wasn't really focused on who played what role, but Sandra Bullock is in the movie, and Steve Martin, and Martin Short, and all of these great people.
Ray Fiennes,
what a classic. Val Kilmer. Yeah, I mean, the voice acting is top-notch. At a time when, really you had maybe 1 or 2 stars in an animated film, this was an entire cast, something that they do today.
That's probably one of the greatest strengths of it that I like.
I think it is. And also the animation was good. now it's my turn to sort of downplay some of the songs. Other than the 6-minute or so song number that opens the film, which was fantastic.
Epic even.
The song When You Believe, which was a huge radio hit for Mariah Carey, so I knew it from that.
Good one.
And there's another song in the film that I liked. Other than that, the songs, I think, were the downfall of the movie. Granted, this isn't my kind of a story anyway, with the epic scope of it, let's say. But I did enjoy the film, and like you gentlemen, I would give it like about a B range.
I'm happy with that.
So, yeah. It's B's all around, I guess, for our...
What's that word?
All right, nothing too terrible then.
I don't regret the experience.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you guys finally got to watch it. I'm glad I got to watch Prince of Egypt.
We should assign some homework assignments again sometime.
Yeah, we
should.
We gotta keep this up.
Yeah, maybe not every week, because I like to watch new movies for the upcoming top 5s, too.
well, that too, yeah.
But I didn't have to this week, because I think I had some good choices to select from, and that is our top 5 murder mysteries. This is a little bit more of an open-ended list, but I think we all sort of agreed that because we'd started with mysteries in general and then went to murder mysteries, and we sort of all agreed that the mystery of the movie had to be surrounding a murder in some way, shape, or form. So why don't we start out with Justin for a switch and hear Justin's 5 through 2.
Thank you, Dan. Here it goes. Number 5 is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. While this may be a somewhat silly addition to the list, director Robert Zemeckis truly put together a film not only bridging the lines between animation and live action to a whole new level, but also creating one of the most original mysteries in cinema. Unraveling the answer to the titular question never ceases to hold interest, particularly with its constant twists and turns. Number 4 is a incredibly underrated film in my opinion, and that is Dead Again. I feel like this one deserves a spot on this list strictly for being one of the most complicated yet unique mysteries ever made. There's no question that it's difficult making a mystery. It must be downright strenuous, if not exhausting, tying in a love story involving reincarnation as well. All that aside, it works, and it's largely thanks to a great cast from actor and also director Kenneth Branagh, Emma Thompson, and even Robin Williams in one of his most underappreciated performances. Unfortunately, it does become a bit more of a thriller come the finale, but before that, it is truly a fantastic, investing mystery worthy of a spot on this list.
I'm glad you put that on there. That was a movie I saw when it first premiered on TV, so probably 1993 maybe, and it was really, really good.
No one talks about that one.
No, and it's really a shame. I wish it got more discussion.
Yeah, it's a good recommendation.
Number 3, and it is the only Alfred Hitchcock movie on this list, I wanted to narrow it down to just one.
Fair enough.
Is Rope. There's a handful of Hitchcock movies that I could have put on this list, but I feel like Rope deserves a slot on its originality to the murder mystery subgenre. A great mystery focuses on the motives and how the suspects avoid capture, and from the very beginning, that's at the heart of Rope. As such, watching the murderous main characters struggle to remain calm under pressure while hiding their vicious secret becomes both suspenseful and intriguing. And my number 2 is L.A. Confidential. Murder mysteries and noir often go hand in hand, and L.A. Confidential is truly one of the best in the genre. Admittedly, it's a contemporary noir, but great performances, ranging from Danny DeVito to Guy Pearce, and a compelling layered mystery make it all the better. Although the mystery may be a bit too expansive with a number of different things being investigated, L.A. Confidential still is a great mystery worthy of being the runner-up slot on this list.
Cool. Great list. I that's one I have not seen, L.A. Confidential, and I know it won a lot of awards, and that was just, it came out at the time I just didn't see a lot of movies, and I never got to catch up on that one.
That's a very good period piece.
Yeah.
It really, really is.
Joe, how about your 5 through 2?
My number 5 is one that we actually watched not too long ago, and that would be The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the American version. I didn't think I was going to be looking forward to this film because I liked the original, but I thought that it really, really exceeded from the original in a lot of ways. It was very easy to get into, it was incredibly well paced, and I found that both storylines were really interesting and interwoven, and the final mystery, when you get to it, is really, really surprising, and it does build up to a really dark and scary and exciting conclusion. Number 4 is one of my favorite thrillers, but it does have some heavy elements of murder mystery, and that would be Seven. Basically, once again, Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt both giving great leading performances. I have to say, it's one of their best films by far. They have great chemistry, and Kevin Spacey is an awesome villain. And I did enjoy the whole Seven Sins hook. I thought there was a really interesting theme. It was a great character study, and it has this brilliant, dark, ominous atmosphere that is just incredible to behold. And number 3 is one that Justin mentioned, and that would be Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Now, I'm pretty much not going to reiterate anything that he said because it's pretty awesome. I'm just going to add that Christopher Lloyd is amazing, and everyone needs to know that.
Yes, he is.
But I really liked the massive blend of animation to live action. Is something that you didn't get to see that much of that expansive scope at the time, and to get Warner Brothers and Disney to join up on a massive collaboration like that,
so crazy,
as well written and acted and directed as it was. Those kind of collaborations need to happen again, because really it's just amazing. Whoever brokered that deal was a genius. Number 2 is one that I believe Justin has some issues with, but I still think that it's a pretty intriguing film. And that would be Memento, with Guy Pearce playing the main lead. I will admit that upon rewatching, this film does have some issues, perhaps from a moral standpoint, but it is really cool to watch it again and kind of try to pick all the pieces together. And, of course, the filming itself kind of follows a really interesting narrative. The whole story takes place out of order. I personally really like the conclusion of this film. Once again, it is kind of dark, and it is one of those films that really deserves many watchings.
I have not seen your number 2 either.
You have not?
I have not seen Memento.
Oh, it's worth it.
Yeah, that's what I keep hearing. Well, my top 5, maybe the first list we've done, where I've only seen these movies one time, except for my number 4, but it just goes to show how incredible the movies are. Most of them I've seen actually within the last, let's say, 3 or 4 years, even though they're fairly old. My number 5 is Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which we're going to discuss later on in the program. I really liked that, and we watched that this week for Old Classics, so we'll talk about that in a bit. My number 4 is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I'm glad you guys both put this on your list.
Sensing a theme.
It was one of the last ones I actually even thought of as a murder mystery, because you don't necessarily think of it, right away. But, yeah, I mean, I can't add really much to what either of you said. Christopher Lloyd is amazing, as is the film as a whole. This is the one I had seen multiple times. I've seen this probably 3 or 4 times, including when it was originally released in theaters, and it just blew me away. As a huge fan of Warner Brothers specifically growing up. My number 3 is Seven. It is a great murder mystery. Both Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman give outstanding lead performances in the movie. And there's a lot of great twists in it. This is one of these movies that a friend of ours had brought, and I was like, all right, I've never seen this movie. And immediately I went on Amazon that night, bought it on DVD and Blu-ray. I mean, it's just a fantastic movie. And I do hope to watch it again. Number 2 is The Silence of the Lambs. We have discussed this movie actually very recently with the Jodie Foster top 5, so I won't go into too much detail, but to say that it's definitely deserving of all of the accolades that it got when it won all 5 of the top Oscar awards in its year of release. I mean, it's not specifically categorized as a murder mystery, but it does have those elements to it. I would say it's more of a thriller or a horror even at some points, but the performances are great, specifically obviously by Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins. All right, Justin, let's hear it. What is your top murder mystery?
My number 1 is the 1945 thriller And Then There Were None. Agatha Christie knows how to write mysteries that have lent themselves to wonderful adaptations, and Then There Were None serves as a shining example of this, with an infectious narrative with unexpected twists and turns. This may cause newcomers to this film to become underwhelmed by the end product, but in terms of overall cultural impact and being a great murder mystery to boot, And Then There Were None takes my number 1 spot.
I read that book a long, long time ago, and I've never seen the movie, but the book is outstanding as well. Joe, what's your number 1?
My number 1 is Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah, it is.
And pretty much everything that Dan said before, we talked about it not that long ago, so I won't go into too much depth, but it really does speak volumes. It's got excellent writing, directing, acting, and it's in my top 25 films for a reason.
There you go. All right, well, my number 1 was mentioned by Justin, and I'm actually kind of shocked because I thought you were going to go a different direction with it, because there are so many fantastic Hitchcock movies. But my number 1 is Rope. I saw Rope for the first time about a year ago. It stars James Stewart and Farley Granger, and it truly is a groundbreaking film. For those that don't know, because it isn't one of the more well-known Hitchcock movies. People know it, but not like they would know Psycho or North by Northwest or countless others, Rear Window. But what Rope did was introduce the long shot, in which a lot of these scenes in the film are one take of up to 10 minutes at a time. And it's just outstanding the way it's directed, the way the mystery unfolds, and the performances are just fantastic. If you have not seen Rope, I would definitely recommend it.
I'll be honest, I'm actually surprised that you didn't put Rear Window on your list.
You know what? Rear Window I only saw once, and it was when I was in high school, so Rope is a little fresh from my mind. And I have to say, when I saw Rear Window, I liked it. It's a great movie, obviously, but it did not blow me away the way that Rope did. For whatever reason, Rope really struck a chord with me. And as you know, I really enjoy the whole real-time thing in movies. I think real-time is awesome. Rope utilizes that, and I'm sure is one of the first films to do so.
Not to mention you love your one-set movies.
Yes, and the entire movie takes place in one apartment. I do love a good one-set movie. So I think Rope sort of, would edge out Rear Window, even if I had also watched it recently.
It's funny you guys bring that up, because that narrowly, almost made my list.
Actually, speaking of your list, I'm sort of surprised you didn't put, knowing that you're a big fan of the man, I'm surprised none of David Lynch's filmography made your list.
That's because I think a lot of his films as being surreal, thrillers, and I know what you're getting at. I'm assuming you're kind of going towards Blue Velvet.
Blue Velvet, Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive.
I don't really feel that the mysteries are necessarily murder mysteries in the strict terms that we were going by, because the films are so open to interpretation, and I guess I don't like those films necessarily because of those reasons.
I'd like to mention that Lost Highway was actually one of two movies that almost made my list. The other one being Brick with Joseph Gordon-Levitt. But obviously it didn't break half as much ground as Who Framed Roger Rabbit did, so I had to keep it slot.
That's actually one I forgot about too, and then put on the list because I realized how big a movie it was and how good it was. And
yeah.
I'm not sure if it's well known as a murder mystery, but it is a murder mystery that happens to be very good for a lot of reasons.
On a slightly related note, I know that there's been a lot of talk over the years about them possibly doing a sequel, and just when we think it's about done, like it's completely dead, somebody mentions, oh wait, we could have Who Framed Roger Rabbit 2 in the not too distant future. What are your thoughts on that?
It's funny because that gets rumbled about with maybe half a dozen movies. Beetlejuice is one that has come up many times over the last 4 or 5 years. Goonies is one. Ghostbusters 3. Yeah, Ghostbusters 3 is one that keeps getting mentioned. I am always open to a sequel of a beloved film. I mean, we sort of talked about this, a couple months ago on the show.
If they did make a sequel for it, I'm sure that, considering the fact that it's been about 25 years since the film was released, I think that it would be a very different film no matter what they created. But if they put...
Well, of course.
Well, yes. So it might not meet everybody's expectations, but I think that if they put half the effort they did for the original, it would definitely be something worth seeing.
I'd agree with you. Dan, I was actually surprised. I thought you were going to be the first person to say, this is a horrible idea. Why are they even considering this since the original is so good?
No, that's you that does that. I'm always open for a sequel. Now, remakes are another story. In terms of sequels, I'm always open to at least a second movie. Now, if we're talking Scary Movie 6, I can do without that. But a sequel to a one-off beloved movie, I'm always open for. Especially if the original cast and crew are involved.
I think, as you both put it, it's just a matter of let's wait and see.
Yeah. All right, well, let's get to our triple feature. And that is our new classic, The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, our old classic, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and our Oscar nominee, A to Z, After the Thin Man from 1937. Joe, we're going to start with you and The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey.
Well, many old cast members return to reprise old roles, such as Hugo Weaving as Elrond, Cate Blanchett as Galadriel, and of course Ian McKellen as the Wizard Gandalf. And this film basically is the prequel to the Lord of the Rings saga created by Peter Jackson, based upon the beloved book, The Hobbit. And the film is the first in a trilogy, which we're going to see the second installment very soon. And it follows Frodo's uncle Bilbo Baggins as he is whisked away after being encouraged by Gandalf to go on an adventure to basically give his life a little more spice. And we see him kind of enveloped in this epic story following Thorin Oakenshield and his band of dwarves as they go to retake their fallen kingdom of Erebor. I believe that is the correct pronunciation. Particularly from being held by the monstrous dragon known as Smaug. And being the first part of the journey, they face many different dangers, including trolls and an army of goblins, and a vengeful orc who has a vendetta against Oakenshield, which is kind of an expanded story from the books, but has been taken to greater length, much like many other aspects of the film. This film is, for the most part, a success. It does have some of Peter Jackson's flair. However, you can tell that Guillermo del Toro did have a lot of influence in it because the look of the film is somewhat different. It's not quite as raw as the Lord of the Rings trilogy, however, it does capture some of the majestic scope, and I do feel that the overall feel, particularly the score, and a lot of the costume and set designs, really do reflect the general atmosphere of Peter Jackson's world. I think the strongest points are definitely in, of course, the actors themselves. They give good performances. They follow the storyline from the original story pretty well, but they have expanded in certain areas that I think strengthen it, because in all honesty, The Hobbit itself is a relatively basic plot, and I think expanding it to make it more epic was a good idea, though 3 movies may in fact be a little too much, but that remains to be seen. As for this film, I really enjoyed it. I thought the pacing was pretty good. Admittedly, it does kind of stumble in some points, like particularly towards the beginning. There is a setup that's nice. We see Frodo played by Elijah Wood, and Bilbo by Ian Holm, once again from the original film. However, even though that's a nice stage point, I don't know if it's particularly necessary. But once the film really gets going, I think it's very enjoyable. Though the effects are honestly not as good as they were in the early 2000s, they still look enjoyable to me, at least better than some of the stuff I've seen. Overall, I would give Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey a B+.
All right, cool. I was kind of poised to be somewhat skeptical when they announced this was coming out, because it is 3 nearly 3-hour movies, so you're looking at probably 8.5 hours total from one 300-page book. And like you said, it's indulgent. I think it's unnecessary and a bit ridiculous. But that being said, it wouldn't have qualified as a new classic for this show if I didn't give it at least a B. So what did it do right? Well, first of all, as fans of Jackson's take on Lord of the Rings would know, it looks completely gorgeous. It's not nearly as exciting on the small screen as it was in theaters, but it's still a heck of a tale, or at least the first third of one. The movie does drag in several places, and like Joe said, it takes a little while to get going. I mean, it's a good 40 minutes before anything really happens. But Martin Freeman is a great Bilbo Baggins, and of course Ian McKellen is always welcome as Gandalf the Grey. But The Hobbit is definitely missing something that all 3 Lord of the Rings had, so I leave it with a B. I think it's a shame that it took us so long to see Gollum. Gollum is my favorite character. I love him, and he doesn't show up until like 2 hours at least.
To be fair,
into the movie,
there was a lot of stuff before they reached Gollum. They had to cover.
Yes, there was, and I understand that. But I guess that's sort of my point in saying I could see 2 movies,
which was the original plan.
And then let's all make more money and turn it into 3 movies.
Basically, you're right. Before Justin does his take, I'm curious. You said something interesting. You said that you thought it was missing something the original 3 movies had. I'm curious if you could try to put a word or a few words as to what you think that is. Because, in all honesty, I do believe that The Hobbit is a very different story from Lord of the Rings, so the fact that it has a slightly different feel should be expected.
I think on the whole, it's just not as exciting.
And do you know why that is?
Probably because each of the Lord of the Rings movies had their own book. So they were each adapted from already full material.
That is a good point. And I also think that simply the fact that the plot itself is based on something where the stakes are actually much higher in Lord of the Rings. And
yeah, I would agree with that too. This is just sort of let's go on a journey.
It's a more standard adventure, and honestly the stakes are smaller, though they are definitely some shades of Sauron and later forces later. So,
yeah, I would agree with that. If you don't know, for those listening, I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I saw all 3 movies about 2 years ago in their director's cut form, and I thought they were good, not great, not A+ material for me personally, but all 3 of them I thought were better than I found The Hobbit. And I gave The Hobbit a B, so, I mean, they're all positive for me, but I just felt it was a bit slow. There were things that I wish would have just moved. Some of the scenes were slow. Some of the dialogue was slow.
It was clunky in a few places.
Yeah.
But I feel that for the most part, those were relatively minor things. And I feel that maybe when we see future installments, we might look back on this film in a different light. Hopefully for the better.
I'm very much looking forward to The Desolation of Smaug, which is going to be out in just a couple days. Justin, what do you think of The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey?
Well, to start this off, I think, going off of what Joe mentioned, a rewatch definitely paid off, and like I said, I think this could be viewed in a better light depending on how the second and third movie do. But let's get to the actual review. In the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, director Peter Jackson seemed to have a very firm grasp of what was going to translate well onto screen from the novels and what wasn't. Several years later, with the first installment of the Hobbit trilogy, which did not need to be 3 movies, Jackson seems to have thrown that idea out and placed a larger emphasis on just simply making it look good. That's not to say that he doesn't find some success with this, albeit the result is occasionally cartoonish. Perlman gives a very spirited performance as Bilbo, though McKellen returning as Gandalf the Grey seems as if he's been gone too long and forgotten how to play the role. It's understandable that the source material is not the same as Lord of the Rings, and the next 2 installments will hopefully be more engaging, but the first film can and should do a bit more than just merely set the stage. The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey gets a B.
Yeah, I agree with that last statement. I mean, I guess, the main thing of The Hobbit is the dragon, Smaug, and we see him very briefly at the end of the film. I mean, it's like watching the Oz and Great and Powerful in 3 installments, and we don't even meet Oz until the final 5 minutes.
I do think overall that the film was a pretty good adventure story in and of itself, but I do agree with what Justin said. If you really look at it from a very basic level, it is basically one giant teaser for the next movie.
Right.
And it's meant to get you hyped up to see Smaug and the dragon, and it's interesting you mentioned that.
And I think that's a cheat.
It is a little bit, yeah. A little bit of a cheat, but it's kind of interesting you point this out. Smaug is kind of one of the most memorable things about the book, but he's not the quintessential thing. That'll probably be in the third movie.
Okay. I do have to take issue with the Ian McKellen statement,
I completely disagree with that statement.
I think he looks older because it's 10 years past now,
He's
and obviously
tired. He's physically weird.
Gandalf is not supposed to age, and especially because this is a prequel.
He's supposed to be a bit younger, and buff.
So I will give you that, but as far as his performance,
he's fine.
I think he does just a fine job in The Hobbit.
I'll be honest, it just seemed like a very different performance, and
to be honest,
good.
It was supposed to be a different side of Gandalf. Because if you remember, in the book, Gandalf was not the same as he was in Lord of the Rings. He was much kind of softer and kinder in Lord of the Rings. In The Hobbit, he was a bit gruff, to be honest. And honestly, a little scary.
That's true, and maybe that'll come out more in the next movie and the one after that. But right now, it just seems odd. I guess it may have been because, like you said, The Hobbit is a very different movie from the Lord of the Rings. But I still feel...
Well, all right, let me just kind of make that example a little clearer. In Lord of the Rings, Gandalf is a character that's been with the Baggins family for a long time. He's a well-known friend. He's not as mysterious a figure. In The Hobbit, Bilbo only has a vague memory of this guy. So he doesn't really know what to expect. That's why when he kind of comes in the story, he feels a bit odd about him because he's like, oh, this strange wizard fellow, mucking about in my business. It kind of, the first couple scenes of the book did have a similar feel.
And we will review the new movie next week for The Hobbit, so we'll see how it stacks up to An Unexpected Journey. Next up, we're going to do our old classic of the week, and that is Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Now, this is a movie that was brought to us by friend of the show and frequent listener, Tim, and this was his very first outing on the OCT, as we call it, and I think he knocked it out of the park. Robert Downey Jr. stars as Harry Lockhart in this fantastic lampooning of the murder mystery and film noir genres. Harry is on the run from police after a burglary gone wrong and ducks into a film audition and lands the part. Then at a Hollywood party, he meets Perry, nicknamed Gay Perry, a private investigator played hilariously by Val Kilmer, hired to help Harry with his PI role, and he also reacquaints himself with his childhood crush Harmony Lane, played by Michelle Monaghan, who also happens to be at the party. Harry and Perry discover a dead woman locked in the trunk of a vehicle who they may or may not have killed trying to get her out, and around the same time Harmony's sister kills herself. Harry pretends to Harmony that he's a real detective, and he and Perry team up to try and solve everything while attempting to not become suspects themselves. When Tim brought this to us for his old classic, his hint for the movie was that it was the first time he ever liked the lead actor. And I can see why this one turned him around. The film came out in 2005, a time when Downey was still putting his career back together after many stints in rehab and jail, long before Iron Man or Tropic Thunder. And I wouldn't be surprised if his role as Harry turned heads at Marvel into considering him for the Tony Stark role in the first place. The two characters are not far off from each other and are really both extensions of Downey himself. His sharp wit, comic timing, and likability, even when being a jerk, are on full display here, and his chemistry with Val Kilmer is unstoppable. Aside from the actors, the script is funny, gripping, and suspenseful, and I thought the timeline of the story, narrated by the Harry character, makes it pretty original as well, and a great send-up of these kinds of movies. I leave Kiss Kiss Bang Bang with a A. Justin, what'd you think?
Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is one of those films that's clever, but just maybe too clever for its own good. It's a hilariously self-conscious neo-noir, and Robert Downey Jr.'s narration as Harry never ceases to point out how little he is prepared to do this, sometimes literally stopping the movie for extra exposition. This starts out funny, but as the film goes on, it does get to be a bit much, as some of the best bits of dark humor actually end up occurring on screen. The characters, notably Val Kilmer as Gay Perry, as Dan put it, are a beast all their own and help give the film truly the punch it needs. This helps show the talent of the directorial debut of Shane Black, and really is a perfect example of why he was recruited for Iron Man 3, which unfortunately was not as good, but probably would have been worse without him. And for that, and for all these reasons, I leave Kiss Kiss Bang Bang with a very well-deserved B+.
Nice. Joe, what'd you think?
Overall, I really liked it. I think that this is definitely one of Downey Jr.'s best performances. I think that the dialogue was really witty, and the characters were very well written as well, and the actors, particularly Kilmer and Downey, have great chemistry with each other, and those combinations just bring out all this hilarious comedy. There were so many great comedic moments, and I also really liked the stylized nature of the narrative. I thought it was very cool, very well paced, and very unique. I did enjoy that a lot. I do agree with both of the things you said, actually. It is really interesting, and I really enjoyed it, but I do agree that some of the meta humor kind of gets a little old towards the end of the film, and I did find that the murder mystery was a bit clunky at points. I had to kind of go over it in my head a couple times when it all came together. I didn't think it was quite as clear resolution as it could have been, but overall I did enjoy it. And I would give it an A-.
Yeah, there is a lot going on that you sort of have to keep track of.
It's one of those films where I'm definitely going to have to go and watch this again because I feel like I missed a couple little things. But I do think it was very well put together because there were lots of hints and it was definitely well paced and things built upon each other well. But there was a whole lot kind of shooting at the end, just everything just putting into place. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to just kind of go take a step back and examine it further, but it's definitely worth a rewatch.
Yeah, I have to say the style and the narrative and the humor did not wear on me at all. I was along for the whole ride. All right, well, finally we've got After the Thin Man, and that is our Oscar nominee A to Z movie for the week. In 1937, it was nominated for Best Writing, and Justin's going to tell us about that.
After cracking the titular Thin Man case, Nick, played by William Powell, and Nora Charles, played by Myrna Loy, have found newfound celebrity for their investigative efforts. However, their holiday gets interrupted when Nora's cousin Selma, played by Alyssa Landy, reveals that her husband has gone missing. In the first film, much of the first act was devoted to establishing two very clever characters and their general habits. It may have been necessary, but the long time away from the actual mystery takes away from the audience's overall engagement. In the sequel, however, the story dives right in, starting moments after the original film ended and offering up an entertaining mystery with a wide assortment of characters, including a very early appearance by James Stewart, and the series' signature wit. Powell and Loy continue their great chemistry as Nick and Nora, and how they transition from socialites to detectives is truly seamless. The only issues the film suffers from involves running a bit too long, and with an overabundance of characters, it becomes difficult to give everyone their fair share, leaving the suspect list relatively short. That said, After the Thin Man is truly one of the rare sequels that surpasses its predecessor, and I give it an A-.
I will point out before we go to Joe, because I did not find the running time to be at all long.
Compared to the first one.
I was just going to point out, we did watch the first one and the second one back to back because none of us had ever seen either. So I thought, let's watch both of them.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
But the first movie was 90 minutes. The second movie was 2 hours.
That's correct.
The second one was actually longer, but it didn't feel...
I felt the first one was so boring.
I didn't think the first one... I mean, I liked both films. I'm with Justin on that I liked both films, but the first one did take a bit to get started.
Let me rephrase. I thought the first act or so of the first one was quite boring.
Okay.
Once it picked up, it did get good, but it did drag a bit for me at the beginning, but definitely better.
Well, Powell and Loy, as Nick and Nora, are, to use a phrase from the era, smashing. I was completely unfamiliar with these actors before these films. Powell I had heard of, but never seen anything he'd done. But if this were created in the 50s instead of the 30s, I could totally see it having been a huge hit TV series as opposed to a series of 6 films. Powell and Loy's chemistry is great, and you can see why they made 8 other films in their career together other than the Thin Man ones. The movie is funny, clever, is a great mystery, and the addition of Jimmy Stewart is a welcome one, even if I thought he didn't really have enough to do. Like Justin said, there are a lot of different characters in the film, and some of them sort of get pushed aside. He was only in maybe 3 or 4 scenes. But the first one, like we said, is a little bit long in the tooth. I did not find the length of time on the second one a problem at all. I really enjoyed it. And I do wonder if maybe it's because we had been watching Thin Man things for 3.5 hours by the end of it total.
That might be
that
a
it wore on
to
you.
Consider.
It may have been, but I feel like some of the stuff, like, as we brought up with the fact that they brought on these, like, full-length moments with Robert's mistress, giving us these, like, full-blown numbers.
Oh, yeah, my favorite part.
They do drag a little bit.
A little bit. Yeah, I guess that's true.
Like I said, it's not...
that plot, I do agree that plot point was a little unnecessary.
It was a little off.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that I think it's entirely too long. I just think it's like a smidge, like, cut 5 minutes.
I could agree 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I leave After the Thin Man with an A- as well. Joe, what'd you think?
Overall, I really enjoyed it. Definitely more than the first film. I think they kind of got the characters established so they can move right along. And I think, as you guys both said, these two lead actors have such great chemistry together. They're really good, and they deliver the dialogue so witty, and it's just amazing. They hit it on the nose every single time. It's just really good. They don't miss a beat. It's a hilarious film, but it also is able to stray into these really dark, serious corners, and it doesn't really matter. It's still a great mystery. It's well written, and the conclusion is quite satisfying. And I have to say that for an early Jimmy Stewart performance, he really does show us what great mastery of the craft he already has. He is a brilliant actor, and you see a really diverse performance from him in this role.
Yeah, he's quite young in this.
He's quite good, and I just thought this film was pretty much perfect. I do agree that some of the scenes did drag on a bit long, and I'm not sure all the plot points were entirely necessary, but overall I liked all the cast of characters, and I think it kept me guessing. It was a very good film, and I would also give it an A-.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny. Powell and Loy, since they did so many movies together and have that great chemistry, it seems like the kind of couple that back in the day, before all the gossip magazines and Entertainment Tonight and stuff, I wouldn't be surprised if people really thought they were a married couple. I mean, they looked great together. They had great chemistry.
Judging by the performances, I honestly believe it myself. I'm still surprised they were just friends.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if there was more going on.
Yeah, I actually wouldn't either, because they hit it off great. And if you have not seen these Thin Man movies, they're both available from Netflix. The Thin Man, I believe, is available for instant streaming on Amazon as well, the original, not After the Thin Man.
I've actually seen a couple of the other films before, and I do like the Thin Man character. I would recommend this series if you really like mystery novels and just mystery films in general. They're really good classic ones to check out.
Yeah. All right, well, we leave it on that. Next week we have a really interesting top 5, because we will be, like we've been talking about, reviewing The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug. We're going to talk about our top 5 second movies in trilogies. Like The Hobbit is going to be a trilogy, and this is the second film. So that will be interesting, and of course we'll have a full review of that movie as well. Joe, anything new on the Merlino page on YouTube.
Well,
Merlin the Mighty.
I've got a bunch of things that I'm planning to try and put up soon, but at the moment, no, nothing really. Just some more anime reviews and discussions of that nature. But there'll be a lot of content coming up soon. Hopefully, I'll be able to get one of our podcasts up with some more editing tricks.
Yeah, cool. And if you want to join in the conversation, please give us your favorite murder mysteries. Give us your take on any of these films. You can do it in the comment section of YouTube or the Facebook group as well, Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. And we have our Twitter as well, which is @FilmFanaticsPod. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye!